Is nonsense a good thing? Well, while not everyone may agree, there are some first-class poets who have indulged in it. In fact, from Edward Lear to Lewis Carroll to Sukumar Ray, a galaxy of poetry stars has contributed to nonsense verse. Listen to a few of their stories and a sampling of their poetry, including a poem translated from Bengali by yours truly. But first, if you haven't already, do subscribe to The English Nut on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube and Twitter. Thank you. Nonsense verse has a unique place in literature. While most writing, verse or otherwise, is focused on making sense of things, here is a category of poetry that seems to thrive on not making sense. What's more, some of the most famous poets have contributed to this form. And while much of it is ostensibly written for children, many adults, including this one, enjoy it too. One of my favorite poets is Ogden Nash. While he is considered a comic poet rather than specifically a writer of nonsense verse, I would like to kick off this video with one of his poems. It's titled The Termite. Some primal termite knocked on wood and tasted it and found it good, and that is why your cousin May fell through the parlor floor today. In other words, thanks to termites acquiring a taste for wood back in the day, some of their modern era descendants ate their way through the wooden floor of Cousin May's parlor, leading to a minor mishap. Some critics say that Nash's poems do not meet the requirements to be deemed nonsense verse. Of course, that does not make them any less enjoyable. But it does lead us to the question, what exactly is nonsense verse? Well, what sets nonsense verse apart from other forms of comic verse is that it overturns language rules and resists being rationally interpreted. From that perspective, I suppose Nash's poem makes too much sense? You decide. Let's go back in time to Edward Lear, the father of nonsense verse. A book of nonsense written by Lear in 1846 is considered the seminal work of this literary movement. I will recite for you a stanza of what is probably his most famous nonsense poem, The Owl and the Pussycat, from his 1871 collection, Nonsense Songs, Stories, Botany and Alphabets. The Owl and the Pussycat went to sea in a beautiful pea-green boat. They took some honey and plenty of money wrapped up in a 5-pound note. It's quite a romantic poem. I hope I've been able to whet your appetite sufficiently for you to look it up and read the rest of it. You'll discover, among other things, an item called a runcible spoon in this poem. This Lear coinage apparently means a fork with 3 curved prongs. This definition seems to me to be arrived at by people trying to give meaning to something that doesn't have any. Nonsense poems such as this one by Lear were used to mock scholarly conventions and academic notions of literature. It was also about having the last laugh at the belief that nonsense verse is an inferior form of writing intended for children and not for serious adults. The other writer famed for his nonsense verse is Lewis Carroll. In poems like Jabberwocky, the nonsense form is used to describe a magical world that is indescribable using standard writing. I will recite a few stanzas of the poem to give you a sense of it. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the Jub-Jub bird and shun the frumious Bandersnatch. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through, the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O frabjous day, callooh, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome rats outgrabe. Jabberwocky gives us portmanteau words like chortle, galumph and frumious. Some of the other words in the poem, such as brillig, are what are called nonce words, meaning words coined for one-time use. The word Jabberwock refers to a monster, the imaginary one Carroll's poem is about. Some of the made-up words have had meanings ascribed to them by the author and others later on. You may look them up if you're keen to. Since they aren't really used anymore, I'm not going to spend time on them. But that shouldn't stop us from marveling at the creative genius of the poet. Next, the spotlight falls on an actor, comedian, writer, musician, poet and playwright called Terence Allen Milligan. This multi-talented guy disliked his first name so much that after hearing a band called Spike Jones and his City Slickers, he changed it to Spike. Spike Milligan has an Indian connection. He was born in Ahmednagar, India, to an Irish father and English mother. He spent his childhood in the cities formerly known as Pune and Rangoon. He studied at the Convent of Jesus and Mary, Pune, and St. Paul's High School, Rangoon. From Rangoon, he relocated to Britain and spent most of the rest of his life there. As an adult, Spike kept himself busy entertaining millions of people along with the comedy group called The Goons. But he also found time to write nonsense verse. One of his poems, On the Ning, Nong, was voted Britain's favourite comic poem in 1998, ahead of the works of Lewis Carroll and Edward Lear. Let me recite it for you. On the Ning, Nong, where the cows go bong and the monkeys all say boo, there's a Nong, Ning, where the trees go ping and the teapots jibber jabber jew. On the Nong, Nang, all the mice go clang, and you just can't catch 'em when they do. So it's Ning, Nong, cows go bong, Nong, Ning, trees go ping, Nong, Nang, the mice go clang. What a noisy place to belong is the Ning, Nang, Nong. As you can see, the images conjured by this poem are completely illogical, but despite, or perhaps because of using made-up words, it manages to light up our imagination. Finally, let's come closer to home to the wonderful Sukumar Ray of Bengal and to Abul Tabul, his book of nonsense verse. The Bengali words Abul Tabul may be translated literally as nonsense. Abul Tabul is just one of his evergreen works of prose and poetry for children, which adults derive equal if not more pleasure from. Sukumar Ray's father, Upendra Kishore Rai Chaudhary, was a children's writer too. Upendra Kishore started his own printing press and launched a children's magazine called Sandesh. Sandesh means both news and a type of Bengali sweet. So it was the perfect title for a children's magazine. When Upendra Kishore passed away just 2 years after the birth of Sandesh, Sukumar took charge of it. Sukumar had studied photography and printing technology in England and was able to use his learnings in the running of the press and the magazine. The latter was also a perfect outlet for his creative writing and imaginative illustrations. Abul Tabul may be considered the seminal work of Bengali nonsense verse, the equivalent of Edward Lear's Book of Nonsense. There are many marvelous poems in it. It's difficult to capture their essence in English. Nevertheless, I have attempted to translate his poem Bhoy Peona. I've titled it Don't Be Afraid. This is how it goes. Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you, I swear. I'll lose if I wrestle you, so I wouldn't dare. I'm just so soft-hearted. What could I do? I couldn't bite anyone even if I wanted to. The horns on my head alarm you perhaps? But if I tried a headbutt, I'd likely collapse. To come to my burrow, spend a few days, I'm a great host. That's what everyone says. Is this club in my hand scaring you off? If you felt its lightness, you'd surely scoff. Don't you believe me? I'll grab you by the leg. I'll sit on your head. Then I'll make you beg. There's me, my missus, and my 9 kids too. If you're nervous for nothing, we'll all bite you. The original Bengali poem is far better, but I hope this translation captures a bit of its flavor. I would urge you to read Sukumar Ray's works. If you don't know Bengali, you can always read the English translations, some of which were done by his son, celebrated filmmaker Satyajit Ray. The apparent lack of logic in nonsense verse is what attracts people to it, because it challenges one's conventional ways of thinking and makes one take a fresh look at the written word. Not to mention the fact that unless you're a complete cynic, it's impossible to read or listen to such verse without breaking into a smile. I hope this episode has made you smile and that it's inspired you to take a serious interest in nonsense verse. If there are any nonsense poets you like that I've not covered in this video, do mention them in the comments section. I'm the English Nut. Bye for now.